The crystalline towers of Zephyria Prime gleamed under the twin suns, their surfaces reflecting the desperate faces of the Vakari leadership gathered in the emergency council chamber. Ambassador Thelqua's forearms trembled as she activated the long-range communication array, her species' natural blue luminescence dimmed by exhaustion and fear. "This is Ambassador Thelqua of the Vakari Republic, transmitting on all known frequencies," she spoke into the device, her voice carrying across the vast emptiness of space. "We are under siege by the Krex Armada. Our defenses have fallen. Our colonies burn. We require immediate military assistance from any civilization capable of providing aid. The message would take weeks to reach the nearest known civilizations. The Altarian Federation was too far away, and the Nexus Collective had already refused their earlier pleas for help, claiming the Krex were too dangerous to oppose. But there was one more option, though it filled her with uncertainty. Earth. The humans had only recently made contact with the galactic community, barely 50 years ago. Their technology seemed primitive compared to most advanced species. They still used projectile weapons when others had moved to energy-based systems. Their ships looked crude and bulky next to the sleek vessels of established civilizations. Most galactic powers viewed them as backwards newcomers, barely worth acknowledging, but they were the only ones who hadn't explicitly refused to help. General Vexitar entered the chamber, his usually proud bearing now hunched with defeat. "Ambassador, our outer rim colonies have gone silent. The Krex have begun their advance toward the inner systems. Our military estimates we have perhaps 6 months before they reach the capital worlds." Thelqua nodded grimly. The Krex were a nightmare that had haunted the galaxy for centuries. They appeared without warning, their massive dreadnoughts emerging from hyperspace to devastate entire star systems. They took no prisoners, left no survivors, and disappeared as quickly as they came. Entire civilizations had vanished without a trace after encountering them. "Continue broadcasting our distress signal," she ordered, "and prepare the evacuation protocols. If help doesn't arrive soon..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what happened to species that couldn't defend themselves against the Krex. 3 days later, an unexpected response crackled through their communications array. The voice was rough, speaking in heavily accented galactic standard, with strange pauses and inflections that marked it as distinctly human. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force vessel Indomitable. We received your distress call. Our fleet is en route to your coordinates. Estimated arrival in 4 days. Hold position and prepare for joint military operations." The council chamber fell silent. Thelqua stared at the communication device in disbelief. The humans were actually coming? Their small, primitive fleet against the unstoppable Krex Armada? "Ma'am," her aide whispered urgently, "our long-range sensors are detecting the human fleet. They're significant in number." Thelqua rushed to the sensor station, her eyes widening at what she saw. The humans hadn't sent a small relief force or a token gesture of support. They had sent what appeared to be their entire military. Hundreds of ships moved through space in tight formation, their angular, utilitarian design so different from the flowing curves preferred by most species. But it was their approach that caught her attention. Most civilizations would have sent diplomatic messages first, established protocols, negotiated terms of engagement. The humans had simply said they were coming and started moving. No hesitation, no conditions, no political maneuvering. Just direct action. "Patch me through to their flagship," she ordered. Captain Chen's image appeared on the view screen, and Thelqua was struck by how young she looked. Humans age differently than Vakari, but this woman couldn't have been more than what they would consider middle-aged. Her dark eyes held an intensity that was both reassuring and slightly unsettling. "Captain Chen, I am Ambassador Thelqua. We are grateful for your response, but I must warn you about what you're facing. The Krex have destroyed civilizations far more advanced than either of our species. They have weapons that can crack planets and shields that have never been penetrated. Are you certain your forces can..." Chen's expression didn't change. "Ambassador, with respect, we didn't come here to debate whether we can win. We came here to win. Period. What we need from you is tactical information about their fleet composition, their movement patterns, and any intelligence your people have gathered about their technology." The directness of her response caught Thelqua off guard. Most military leaders would have at least acknowledged the magnitude of the threat, perhaps shown some concern about casualties or discussed fallback plans. This human spoke as if victory was simply a matter of application rather than possibility. Captain, in our last engagement with the Krex, they deployed over 300 capital ships. Their smallest vessels are larger than our battleships, and their flagships— Thelqua paused, remembering the massive dreadnoughts that had obliterated her people's finest fleet in minutes. They're like moving moons bristling with weapons we don't understand. Chen nodded, making notes on a tablet. Numbers are good. Size estimates are helpful. What about their tactical preferences? Do they prefer direct assault, siege warfare, hit-and-run attacks? They simply arrive and destroy everything, Thelqua said helplessly. There's no pattern we've been able to discern. They appear, they attack, they annihilate, they leave. No communication, no demands, no apparent strategic objectives beyond total destruction. For the first time, Chen's expression shifted slightly, not to concern or fear, but to what looked almost like satisfaction. So they're used to enemies who break and run. Understood. Ambassador will be arriving in your system in approximately 18 hours. We recommend your remaining military assets pull back to defensive positions around your core worlds. We'll handle the initial engagement. Captain, I don't think you understand the scale of what you're facing. Our combined fleets couldn't even slow them down. How do you expect to— Ambassador, Chen interrupted gently. You asked for help. We're here to provide it. Trust us to do our job, and we'll trust you to keep your people safe while we work. The transmission ended, leaving Thelqua staring at the blank screen. Around her, the council members exchanged worried glances. Had they just asked for help from a species too naive to understand the danger they were walking into? Or had they discovered something about humans that the rest of the galaxy had missed? Outside the tower windows, the stars continued their eternal dance, unaware that in just hours, they would witness either humanity's first great defeat in galactic warfare, or something far more extraordinary. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyria system, with a precision that impressed even the Vakari military observers. Unlike the scattered arrivals typical of most species faster-than-light travel, the Earth ships emerged in perfect formation, their positions calculated down to the meter. Admiral Thelqua watched from the bridge of the orbital defense station as the human vessels took up positions throughout the system. What she saw defied her expectations in every way possible. The ships weren't the small primitive craft she had anticipated. They were massive, their hulls scarred and reinforced in ways that spoke of extensive combat experience. Admiral, her sensor operator called out, I'm reading some very unusual configurations on those ships. Their armor appears to be layered, and those weapon ports— Captain Chen's voice crackled through the communication system. Admiral Thelqua, this is Captain Chen aboard the Indomitable. We're detecting the Krex fleet approximately 6 hours out from the system's edge. They're moving in their typical wedge formation, 347 capital ships, just as your intelligence indicated. The precision of their sensor readings surprised Thelqua. Human technology was supposed to be inferior, yet they were detecting details about the Krex fleet that her own advanced sensors couldn't match. Captain Chen, how are you able to scan them at that distance? Our instruments are having difficulty penetrating their jamming fields. There was a pause before Chen responded. Different scanning principles, Admiral. We'll explain later. Right now, we need to discuss battlefield coordination. Are your remaining ships able to provide support, or should they maintain defensive positions? Thelqua looked at her tactical display. The human fleet was spreading out across the system in patterns that made no sense, according to standard galactic military doctrine. Instead of forming a defensive line or preparing for a direct engagement, they were positioning themselves seemingly at random throughout the asteroid belt and near gas giant moons. Captain, our remaining forces are minimal and damaged. We have perhaps 30 ships still capable of combat operations. But I must ask, what is your tactical plan? Your deployment doesn't match any recognized battle formation. Another human voice joined the conversation, older and gruffer than Chen's. Admiral, this is Fleet Commander Harrison. We appreciate the offer of support from your ships, but we're going to handle this differently than you might expect. Keep your people back, watch, and be ready to assist with any evacuations if needed. The dismissal stung, but Thelqua had to admit her forces weren't in any condition to face the Krex again. Her people had tried everything conventional tactics could offer and failed catastrophically. As the hours passed, the human fleet continued their mysterious preparations. Ships disappeared into asteroid fields. Others took positions behind planets and moons, and several groups moved to seemingly empty regions of space. It looked less like a military deployment and more like they were abandoning the battlefield entirely. "Admiral," her chief of staff whispered nervously, "it appears the humans are hiding. This can't be their battle plan." But Thelqua noticed something her staff had missed. The humans weren't just hiding. They were being very selective about where they hid. Every position offered clear escape routes, overlapping fields of fire, and multiple tactical options. It wasn't cowardice. It was preparation for something. The Krex fleet arrived exactly when the humans predicted. Their massive dreadnoughts transitioning from hyperspace in a display of coordinated power that had intimidated countless civilizations. The wedge formation was a thing of terrifying beauty. 300 ships moving as one, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that could glass planets. As expected, the Krex immediately began moving toward the populated inner system, their intent clear. They would destroy the orbital installations first, then systematically eliminate every trace of Vakari civilization. What happened next would be discussed in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. The first indication that something was different came when the lead Krex dreadnoughts passed through what appeared to be empty space near a large asteroid. Without warning, massive explosions erupted along their hulls. Not the clean energy discharges typical of most galactic warfare, but violent, chaotic detonations that sent debris spinning in all directions. "What was that?" Thelqua demanded of her sensor operator. "Unknown, Admiral." There was nothing there. No ships, no energy signatures, nothing. But the humans clearly knew what had happened. "All units, this is Commander Harrison. Mines are active. Begin flanking maneuvers on my mark." Mines. Thelqua's blood went cold. The humans had mined the approach routes, but that was impossible. You couldn't place effective mines in space without massive installations and months of preparation. The humans had been here for less than a day. The Krex response was swift and predictable. Their formation tightened. Their shields came online, and they began sweeping the space ahead of them with energy beams designed to detonate any hidden explosives. It was a textbook response to a minefield, which was exactly what the humans had been counting on. As the Krex focused their attention on the space ahead of them, human ships suddenly appeared from seemingly impossible positions. They didn't emerge from behind asteroids or planets as Thelqua had expected. They simply materialized in empty space, already firing. The weapons they used were unlike anything in the Vakari database. Instead of energy beams or particle streams, the humans launched what appeared to be solid projectiles. But these projectiles moved at significant fractions of light speed, and when they struck Krex shields, the results were devastating. "How are they doing that?" her weapons officer gasped. "Those are kinetic rounds, but they're punching through Krex shielding like it's not even there." The human ships moved unlike anything Thelqua had ever seen. They didn't glide gracefully through space or maintain elegant formations. They jerked, twisted, and accelerated in patterns that seemed almost random, making them nearly impossible to target effectively. But their weapons fire was anything but random. Every shot was precisely placed, targeting specific systems on the Krex vessels. "Admiral," her communication officer called out urgently, "I'm picking up human tactical chatter. They're calling out specific targets by ship designation. They know exactly which Krex vessels are command ships, which carry their heaviest weapons, which are support craft. How do they have that level of intelligence?" The battle continued to unfold in ways that defied everything the Vakari understood about warfare. The humans never formed traditional battle lines or engaged in the massive ship-to-ship duels that characterized most galactic conflicts. Instead, they struck like swarms of predators, appearing suddenly, delivering devastating attacks, and disappearing before the Krex could respond effectively. Most remarkable was their apparent immunity to the psychological warfare that the Krex had perfected. The dark ships had always been as much about intimidation as firepower, their mere presence enough to break the morale of most enemy forces. But the humans seemed utterly unconcerned by the reputation of their opponents. They attacked with a cold efficiency that was somehow more terrifying than the Krex's legendary brutality. "Admiral," her tactical officer reported with amazement in his voice, "the Krex formation is beginning to show signs of confusion. They're not adapting to human tactics. It's as if they don't understand what they're facing." Thelqua watched the tactical display with growing astonishment. For the first time in recorded galactic history, A Krex armada was not dominating a battle. They weren't losing yet, but they weren't winning either. And for the Krex, that was unprecedented. The battle had been raging for 3 hours, and Admiral Thelquois found herself witnessing something she had never thought possible. The unstoppable Krex armada was being systematically dismantled by a species they had barely bothered to acknowledge. The human tactics were unlike anything in galactic military doctrine. Where other species relied on massive energy shields and elegant formations, humans used deception, misdirection, and what could only be described as controlled chaos. Their ships would appear to retreat, drawing Krex vessels into carefully prepared kill zones where concealed human forces would emerge from impossible angles. "Admiral," her communications officer announced, "we're intercepting human battle chatter. It's unusual." Thelquois authorized the relay, and the bridge speakers filled with human voices speaking in rapid, clipped phrases that somehow managed to convey enormous amounts of tactical information in seconds. "Tango 7, you've got 3 heavies bearing down on your position. Recommend immediate withdrawal to Rally Point Echo." "Copy that, Control." "Charlie Squadron, we need a distraction on bearing 27 Mark 4. Something loud and flashy." "Roger, Tango 7. Charlie Squadron deploying fireworks. Stand by for light show." The casual tone was jarring. These humans spoke about life and death combat, as if they were coordinating a complex but routine operation. There was no panic, no fear, just professional competence applied to the business of destruction. What Thelquois couldn't understand was how they were achieving such coordination. Human ships were spread across the entire system, operating independently in small groups, yet somehow maintaining perfect tactical awareness of the overall battle. Their technology was supposed to be primitive, but their communications and coordination capabilities surpassed anything the Vakari had achieved. "Admiral," her sensor operator called out, "I'm detecting something strange about the human ships. They're rotating their crews?" "Explain." "Several of their vessels have gone dark for brief periods, approximately 15 minutes each. When they return to combat, their performance characteristics remain unchanged, but their energy signatures are slightly different. It's as if they're changing their entire operating crew in the middle of battle." The implications were staggering. No other species could maintain combat effectiveness while rotating personnel during active combat operations. The coordination and training required would be beyond what most civilizations could achieve even in peacetime conditions. Another wave of Krex dreadnoughts pushed toward the inner system. Their massive hulls scarred but still functional. The Krex had adapted to human mind tactics and were now sweeping space more effectively. But the humans adapted as well, and their response was typically direct. Instead of more mines or ambush tactics, human ships began ramming damaged Krex vessels. "Are they insane?" Thelquois' tactical officer gasped as they watched a human frigate accelerate directly into the path of a Krex battleship. But this wasn't a desperate kamikaze attack. At the last second, the human ship's crew evacuated in small craft while the unmanned vessel continued its collision course. The impact was devastating not because of the explosion, but because the humans had perfectly calculated the angle and velocity needed to send the massive Krex ship spinning into 2 of its companions. "They're using their own ships as weapons," Thelquois whispered. "But how are they evacuating entire crews in space combat situations?" Her question was answered as she watched human evacuation procedures. Their escape pods were unlike anything in galactic standard design. Instead of passive emergency craft, they were highly maneuverable vehicles capable of combat operations and immediate integration with other ships. A crew could evacuate from a doomed vessel and be back in action aboard another ship within minutes. Fleet Commander Harrison's voice cut through the tactical chatter. "All units, this is Harrison. Krex command ship identified. Designation Alpha Prime, coordinates transmitting now. Time for some direct conversation." What followed was perhaps the most audacious military maneuver Thelquois had ever witnessed. Instead of continuing their hit-and-run tactics, a group of human ships formed up in a tight formation and began a direct assault on the Krex flagship. The massive Krex dreadnought was easily 20 times the size of the largest human vessel, protected by shields that had never been penetrated and armed with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Common sense suggested that a direct attack was suicide, but these humans had redefined what was possible. The assault began with a coordinated barrage from ships positioned throughout the system. Not at the flagship itself, but at specific points in space around it. The kinetic rounds didn't impact anything immediately visible, but Thelqua's sensors detected massive distortions in the local space-time fabric. "What are they shooting at?" she demanded. "Unknown, Admiral. The rounds appear to be striking empty space, but they're causing gravitational anomalies." "It's as if they're bending space?" The answer became clear as the human assault formation approached the Krex flagship. The gravitational distortions created by their earlier bombardment had formed a corridor of warped space that somehow deflected the flagship's weapons fire. Not blocked or absorbed, but redirected into harmless trajectories. The humans had weaponized physics itself. As the assault ships closed with their target, they deployed weapons that defied easy categorization. Instead of energy beams or projectiles, they seemed to be firing compressed packets of matter and energy that behaved unlike anything in galactic science. When these weapons struck the Krex shields, they didn't explode or penetrate. They simply caused sections of the shield to cease functioning. "Admiral," her science officer reported with obvious confusion, "those human weapons appear to be exploiting fundamental flaws in Krex shield technology. Flaws that no one knew existed." The Krex flagship, for the first time in its operational history, found itself vulnerable, its shields failing in cascading patterns, its weapons unable to target the human ships effectively, its massive bulk suddenly more liability than asset, and that was when the humans demonstrated what Thelqua would later describe as their most terrifying capability. They communicated with the Krex not in the sense of establishing diplomatic contact, but in terms of direct information warfare. Human ships began broadcasting signals directly into the Krex vessels' command systems, not to damage them, but to learn from them. In real time during active combat, the humans were hacking into Krex technology and downloading everything they could find. "They're copying their entire database," Thelqua's intelligence officer reported with amazement. "Ship specifications, tactical doctrine, star charts, everything. And they're doing it while simultaneously attacking the same vessel." The Krex response was predictable. Faced with the first real threat to their operations in centuries, they began a fighting withdrawal. Not a retreat exactly, but a tactical repositioning, designed to preserve their forces for a more advantageous engagement. It was a reasonable military decision that demonstrated the Krex were pragmatic opponents, rather than mindless destroyers. Unfortunately for them, it was also exactly what the humans had been maneuvering them toward since the battle began. "All units, this is Commander Harrison. Execute Protocol 7. Thelqua had no idea what Protocol 7 was, but she was about to learn that humans had been preparing for this war far longer than anyone realized. The battle had been raging for 3 hours, and Admiral Thelqua found herself witnessing something she had never thought possible. The unstoppable Krex armada was being systematically dismantled by a species they had barely bothered to acknowledge. The human tactics were unlike anything in galactic military doctrine. Where other species relied on massive energy shields and elegant formations, humans used deception, misdirection, and what could only be described as controlled chaos. Their ships would appear to retreat, drawing Krex vessels into carefully prepared kill zones where concealed human forces would emerge from impossible angles. "Admiral," her communications officer announced, "we're intercepting human battle chatter. It's unusual." Thelqua authorized the relay, and the bridge speakers filled with human voices speaking in rapid, clipped phrases that somehow managed to convey enormous amounts of tactical information in seconds. "Tango 7, you've got 3 heavies bearing down on your position. Recommend immediate withdrawal to Rally Point Echo." "Copy that, Control." "Charlie Squadron, we need a distraction on bearing 27 Mark 4. Something loud and flashy." "Roger, Tango 7. Charlie Squadron deploying fireworks. Stand by for light show." The casual tone was jarring. These humans spoke about life and death combat, as if they were coordinating a complex but routine operation. There was no panic, no fear, just professional competence applied to the business of destruction. What Thelqua couldn't understand was how they were achieving such coordination. Human ships were spread across the entire system, operating independently in small groups, yet somehow maintaining perfect tactical awareness of the overall battle. Their technology was supposed to be primitive, but their communications and coordination capabilities surpassed anything the Vakari had achieved. "Admiral," her sensor operator called out, "I'm detecting something strange about the human ships. They're rotating their crews." "Explain." Several of their vessels have gone dark for brief periods, approximately 15 minutes each. When they return to combat, their performance characteristics remain unchanged, but their energy signatures are slightly different. It's as if they're changing their entire operating crew in the middle of battle. The implications were staggering. No other species could maintain combat effectiveness while rotating personnel during active combat operations. The coordination and training required would be beyond what most civilizations could achieve even in peacetime conditions. Another wave of Krex dreadnoughts pushed toward the inner system. Their massive hulls scarred but still functional, the Krex had adapted to human mind tactics and were now sweeping space more effectively. But the humans adapted as well, and their response was typically direct. Instead of more mines or ambush tactics, human ships began ramming damaged Krex vessels. Are they insane? Thelqua's tactical officer gasped as they watched a human frigate accelerate directly into the path of a Krex battleship. But this wasn't a desperate kamikaze attack. At the last second, the human ship's crew evacuated in small craft while the unmanned vessel continued its collision course. The impact was devastating not because of the explosion, but because the humans had perfectly calculated the angle and velocity needed to send the massive Krex ship spinning into two of its companions. They're using their own ships as weapons, Thelqua whispered. But how are they evacuating entire crews in space combat situations? Her question was answered as she watched human evacuation procedures. Their escape pods were unlike anything in galactic standard design. Instead of passive emergency craft, they were highly maneuverable vehicles capable of combat operations and immediate integration with other ships. A crew could evacuate from a doomed vessel and be back in action aboard another ship within minutes. Fleet Commander Harrison's voice cut through the tactical chatter. All units, this is Harrison. Krex command ship identified. Designation Alpha Prime, coordinates transmitting now. Time for some direct conversation. What followed was perhaps the most audacious military maneuver Thelqua had ever witnessed. Instead of continuing their hit-and-run tactics, a group of human ships formed up in a tight formation and began a direct assault on the Krex flagship. The massive Krex dreadnought was easily 20 times the size of the largest human vessel, protected by shields that had never been penetrated and armed with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Common sense suggested that a direct attack was suicide, but these humans had redefined what was possible. The assault began with a coordinated barrage from ships positioned throughout the system. Not at the flagship itself, but at specific points in space around it. The kinetic rounds didn't impact anything immediately visible, but Thelqua's sensors detected massive distortions in the local space-time fabric. What are they shooting at? She demanded. Unknown, Admiral. The rounds appear to be striking empty space, but they're causing gravitational anomalies. It's as if they're bending space? The answer became clear as the human assault formation approached the Krex flagship. The gravitational distortions created by their earlier bombardment had formed a corridor of warped space that somehow deflected the flagship's weapons fire. Not blocked or absorbed, but redirected into harmless trajectories. The humans had weaponized physics itself. As the assault ships closed with their target, they deployed weapons that defied easy categorization. Instead of energy beams or projectiles, they seemed to be firing compressed packets of matter and energy that behaved unlike anything in galactic science. When these weapons struck the Krex shields, they didn't explode or penetrate. They simply caused sections of the shield to cease functioning. Admiral, her science officer reported with obvious confusion, those human weapons appear to be exploiting fundamental flaws in Krex shield technology. Flaws that no one knew existed. The Krex flagship, for the first time in its operational history, found itself vulnerable, its shields failing in cascading patterns, its weapons unable to target the human ships effectively, its massive bulk suddenly more liability than asset, and that was when the humans demonstrated what Thelqua would later describe as their most terrifying capability. They communicated with the Krex not in the sense of establishing diplomatic contact, but in terms of direct information warfare. Human ships began broadcasting signals directly into the Krex vessels' command systems, not to damage them, but to learn from them. In real time during active combat, the humans were hacking into Krex technology and downloading everything they could find. They're copying their entire database, Thelqua's intelligence officer reported with amazement. Ship specifications, tactical doctrine, star charts, everything. and they're doing it while simultaneously attacking the same vessel. The Krek's response was predictable. Faced with the first real threat to their operations in centuries, they began a fighting withdrawal, not a retreat exactly, but a tactical repositioning, designed to preserve their forces for a more advantageous engagement. It was a reasonable military decision that demonstrated the Kreks were pragmatic opponents, rather than mindless destroyers. Unfortunately for them, it was also exactly what the humans had been maneuvering them toward since the battle began. All units, this is Commander Harrison. Execute Protocol 7. Thelqua had no idea what Protocol 7 was, but she was about to learn that humans had been preparing for this war far longer than anyone realized. The boarding operations revealed truths about the Kreks that shocked even the battle-hardened human Marines conducting them. Admiral Thelqua watched the feeds from inside the captured vessels with growing amazement and horror as teams in advanced combat armor explored the alien ships. "Admiral," Captain Chen reported over the communication link, "you're going to want to see this. We've discovered something about the Kreks that changes everything." The video feed from inside the Krek's flagship showed human Marines moving through corridors that were clearly designed for beings far different from what galactic intelligence had suggested. Instead of the massive warrior species everyone had imagined, the corridors were sized for creatures barely larger than humans themselves. "Captain, those proportions don't match our intelligence estimates," Thelqua observed. "The Krek ships are enormous, but the crew quarters appear designed for much smaller occupants." Marine Sergeant Rodriguez, leading the boarding team, provided running commentary as they moved deeper into the ship. "Ma'am, we're finding evidence of massive automation throughout these vessels. It looks like each ship is operated by maybe 2 or 3 dozen actual crew members, with everything else handled by artificial intelligence systems." The implications were staggering. The galaxy had feared the Kreks as some sort of unstoppable warrior race, but the reality was far different. They were a small number of individuals operating incredibly advanced automated warships. "Sergeant, what about the crew themselves? Have you encountered any living Kreks personnel?" "Yes, ma'am. And they're nothing like what we expected." The video feed switched to the ship's command center, where 3 Kreks individuals sat motionless at control stations. They were roughly humanoid in basic shape, but their skin had a metallic quality that reflected the harsh lighting of their ship. Most striking were their eyes, which showed intelligence but also something that looked disturbingly like fear. "They're not fighting us," Rodriguez reported. "They're not even trying to resist. It's like they're waiting for something." Fleet Commander Harrison joined the conversation from his command ship. "Sergeant, we've been analyzing their communication protocols. We think they're trying to establish formal surrender procedures. The problem is their concept of surrender appears to be different from anything in our experience." Dr. Elena Vasquez, the fleet's xenobiology specialist, had been studying the captured Kreks for several hours. Her report painted a picture that revolutionized galactic understanding of their greatest enemy. "Admiral Thelqua, the Kreks aren't a conquering species in the traditional sense. Based on our preliminary analysis, they appear to be survivors of some catastrophic event that occurred approximately 2,000 years ago. Their entire civilization seems built around a single imperative: eliminate threats before those threats can destroy them." The revelation explained so much about Krek's behavior that had puzzled galactic strategists for centuries. They didn't attack for resources or territory. They attacked because they saw every other spacefaring civilization as a potential extinction-level threat to their own survival. "Dr. Vasquez," Thelqua asked, "are you saying the Kreks have been conducting preemptive genocide for 2 millennia? That they destroy civilizations to prevent those civilizations from eventually threatening them?" "That appears to be correct, Admiral. And based on the data we're extracting from their ships, they've been remarkably successful. Our preliminary count suggests they've eliminated over 400 different species in that time period." The number was sobering. 400 civilizations, each representing millions or billions of lives, destroyed by beings who saw existence itself as a threat to their survival. But Captain Chen's next report provided insight into why the Kreks had finally met their match in humanity. "Admiral, we've been analyzing their tactical databases. The Kreks have extremely detailed information about every major galactic civilization, their military capabilities, their technological development, their social structures, but their files on humanity are almost empty." "What do you mean, Captain?" "They know we exist, They know our approximate technological level, but they have almost no intelligence about our military doctrine, our psychological profile, or our historical background. It appears they categorized us as a minimal threat and never bothered to study us properly. Dr. Vasquez expanded on the implications. Admiral, the Kreks have been so successful because they study their targets extensively before attacking. They know exactly how each species will respond to their tactics, what psychological pressure points will cause enemies to break, what technological advantages they can exploit. But they never did that analysis for humanity. Sergeant Rodriguez's voice crackled over the communication system from deep within the Kreks flagship. Command, I think you need to hear this. We've established basic communication with their senior officer, and he's trying to tell us something important. The translation came through primitive universal translators, but the message was clear enough. Your species is not in the files. We prepare for all known threat patterns. Your patterns are unknown. How did you acquire technologies we have not seen? How did you coordinate without detectable communication? How did you remain calm when facing certain destruction? Harrison's response was characteristically direct. Because humans have been fighting for survival since before we had language. Every other species you've encountered probably developed spaceflight during peaceful periods. We developed it while trying to survive everything our planet could throw at us, including ourselves. What followed was perhaps the strangest interrogation in galactic history. The Kreks officer, identified as Strategic Coordinator Vexkoth, began asking questions that revealed just how thoroughly humans had broken their understanding of warfare. Your weapon that destroys space itself. This technology appears in no database. How long have you possessed it? About 6 months, Harrison replied casually. We built it specifically for this engagement. The silence that followed was profound. 6 months to develop and deploy a weapon system that could destroy entire fleets? Most galactic civilizations needed decades just to upgrade their existing technology. Your ships coordinate without detectable communication methods. How is this achieved? Quantum entanglement networks. We've been using them for about 20 years now. Again, stunned silence. Quantum entanglement communication was considered purely theoretical by most galactic civilizations. Dr. Vasquez provided additional context. Coordinator Vexkoth, humanity developed these technologies because we've been preparing for exactly this type of threat. Not the Kreks specifically, but the possibility of encountering hostile civilizations with superior firepower. But you are new to space. How do you prepare for unknown threats? By assuming the worst possible scenario and preparing for that. Humans have been developing military technology continuously for our entire history. When we reached space, we just kept doing what we'd always done. Admiral Thelqua found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about human civilization. They hadn't just stumbled into galactic politics as primitive newcomers. They had arrived as a species that had been unconsciously preparing for galactic warfare for millennia. Captain Chen, she called out, what happens now? The Kreks threat has been eliminated, but you've captured their survivors. What are your intentions? Chen's reply revealed perhaps the most human characteristic of all. Their capacity for mercy even in victory. Admiral, we're going to do something the Kreks have never experienced. We're going to give them a choice. They can continue their current existence as isolated survivors, or they can join the galactic community as productive members. But the random destruction of civilizations ends today. Coordinator Vexkoth's response came through the translators with what sounded like confusion. Join? We do not understand this concept. Others have always been threats to be eliminated. That's because you never tried talking to them first, Harrison replied. Humans learned a long time ago that former enemies often make the strongest allies. As human medical teams began treating wounded Kreks personnel and human engineers studied their technology, Thelqua realized she was witnessing the end of one chapter in galactic history and the beginning of another. The age of Kreks terror was over, but the age of human influence was just beginning. 3 weeks after the battle, Admiral Thelqua found herself aboard the human flagship Indomitable, participating in something unprecedented in galactic history, a peace negotiation with the Kreks. The conference room had been modified to accommodate the different species, with environmental controls adjusted to make everyone as comfortable as possible. Coordinator Vexkoth sat across from Fleet Commander Harrison, no longer the terrifying representative of galactic destruction, but rather a being who seemed genuinely confused by the concept of negotiation. Dr. Vasquez served as translator and cultural liaison, while representatives from a dozen galactic civilizations observed via quantum communication links. "I still do not comprehend your motivations," Vexkoth stated through the translation matrix. "You possess the capability to eliminate us completely. Your weapon platforms could destroy our remaining ships and our hidden bases with minimal effort. Why do you offer cooperation instead?" Harrison leaned back in his chair, a gesture that seemed to fascinate the Krex coordinator. "Because extermination solves the immediate problem, but creates bigger ones long-term. Your people have knowledge and experience that could benefit the galaxy if applied constructively." The human approach to post-victory negotiations baffled not just the Krex but many of the galactic observers as well. Standard practice after defeating a dangerous enemy was either complete destruction or permanent subjugation. The idea of offering former enemies equal partnership was almost unknown. Commander Harrison, Ambassador Keltar of the Altarian Federation, interjected from his communication link. "The Krex have eliminated hundreds of civilizations. How can you consider them suitable for galactic citizenship?" Dr. Vasquez answered before Harrison could respond. "Ambassador, our psychological evaluation of the Krex indicates they were acting from trauma response rather than inherent malice. Their entire civilization developed around preventing their own extinction after they survived some catastrophic event 2 millennia ago. The details of that catastrophe had emerged during the past 3 weeks of interrogation and medical examination. The Krex had once been a peaceful species with a thriving civilization spread across multiple star systems. Then something had arrived in their space and systematically destroyed every world, every colony, every trace of their culture except for a few dozen survivors who had escaped in experimental long-range vessels. The irony," Dr. Vasquez continued, "is that the Krex became exactly what had traumatized them in the first place. They turned into destroyers of civilizations to prevent other civilizations from destroying them." Vexkoth's translation carried what sounded like pain. "The Great Devourers came from beyond known space. They consumed everything. Matter, energy, information. Our worlds became empty void. We swore we would never allow such a threat to arise again. And in preventing that threat, you became a threat yourself," Harrison observed gently. "But that cycle ends now. We're offering you a chance to protect civilizations instead of destroying them. The proposal that emerged from these negotiations would reshape galactic politics for generations. The Krex would share their advanced automation and defensive technologies with the galactic community. In exchange, they would be integrated into a new alliance specifically designed to defend against external threats. But it was the human additions to this alliance that truly impressed Admiral Thelqua. Rather than simply creating another military pact, they proposed establishing research stations, cultural exchange programs, and cooperative development projects that would benefit all member species. Admiral Thelqua, Captain Chen said during a break in the negotiations, "Your people's industrial capabilities, combined with Krex automation and human tactical doctrine, could create defensive systems that would protect the entire galaxy from any future external threat." The scope of human thinking was remarkable. They weren't just solving the immediate problem of the Krex, they were building infrastructure to handle threats that didn't even exist yet. Over the following days, more details of the human proposal emerged. They had spent the week since the battle not just interrogating captured Krex, but analyzing the entire galactic political situation. Their conclusion was that the galaxy needed fundamental restructuring to survive future challenges. "Commander," asked Vexkoth during one session, "your species has been in galactic space for less than a century. How do you possess such understanding of civilization-level threats?" Harrison's answer provided insight into the human psyche that explained much about their success. "Because we've been dealing with civilization-level threats since before we had civilizations. Climate change, resource depletion, war, disease, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions. Every generation of humans has had to solve problems that could end our species." Dr. Vasquez expanded on the point. "Most species develop spaceflight after achieving planetary stability. Humans developed it while actively trying to prevent planetary destruction. Our entire technological development has been driven by existential crisis management. The medical examinations of Krek's personnel had also yielded surprising discoveries. Despite their reputation as ruthless destroyers, the Kreks showed signs of severe psychological trauma that had persisted for 2,000 years. Dr. Vasquez had been working with human psychiatrists to develop treatment protocols. Coordinator Vexkoth, she reported. Our medical teams believe we can address the trauma responses that have driven your people's destructive behavior. It won't be quick or easy, but it's possible to help your species heal from what happened to you. The concept of psychological healing was apparently unknown to the Kreks. They had spent so long focused on preventing future trauma that they had never considered addressing their existing trauma. You would repair our damaged thoughts? Why would you invest such effort in former enemies? Because healthy minds make better decisions than traumatized ones, Harrison replied. And because every species deserves a chance to become what they could be, instead of being trapped by what they've been. Admiral Thelqua watched these exchanges with growing respect for human philosophy. They didn't just win wars and build weapons. They thought about the long-term consequences of their actions and worked to create positive outcomes for everyone involved. The negotiations concluded with agreements that surprised everyone except the humans. The Kreks would maintain their fleets, but under joint command with other galactic civilizations. They would share their technology freely in exchange for integration into galactic society. Most importantly, they would receive comprehensive psychological support to address the trauma that had driven their destructive behavior. But perhaps most significant was the establishment of the Galactic Defense Alliance, with humanity providing strategic coordination and tactical doctrine. The galaxy would finally have a unified response to external threats. Admiral, Captain Chen said as the formal ceremonies concluded, "This is just the beginning. We've eliminated one threat and gained one ally, but the universe is vast and full of dangers we haven't encountered yet." Thelqua nodded, but found herself feeling more optimistic about the galaxy's future than she had in decades. With humans providing leadership and the former Kreks providing technological capability, perhaps the galaxy could finally achieve lasting peace. "Captain, may I ask what humans plan to do next?" Chen's smile was both reassuring and slightly unsettling. "What we always do, Admiral. Prepare for the next crisis and make sure everyone survives it." As the human fleet prepared to depart for Earth, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed by their intervention, Admiral Thelqua realized that the universe had just learned an important lesson about the species from the small blue planet. Humans didn't just fight wars, they won peace. 5 years after the Kreks War, as galactic historians had begun calling it, Admiral Thelqua stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Harmony Station, watching human and Kreks engineers working side by side on defensive installations that would have been impossible for either species to build alone. The transformation had been remarkable. What began as a desperate plea for aid had evolved into the most successful galactic alliance in recorded history. The Galactic Defense Alliance now included over 200 member civilizations, all contributing their unique capabilities to a common goal of mutual protection and prosperity. "Admiral," Dr. Vasquez approached, now wearing the insignia of the Alliance's Chief Science Officer, "we've received reports from the Outer Rim exploration fleets. You're going to want to see this." The data pad contained information that vindicated humanity's long-term strategic thinking. Deep space monitoring stations, jointly operated by human, Kreks, and Vakari personnel, had detected signs of another potential threat approaching from extragalactic space. "How serious is it, Doctor?" "Potentially catastrophic if we'd faced it 5 years ago. But with our current defensive capabilities and early warning systems, it's manageable. The humans were right to prepare for threats we hadn't encountered yet." Through the observation windows, Thelqua could see one of those preparations taking shape. The massive construction project outside the station was humanity's latest contribution to galactic security. A mobile defense platform that could be deployed to any threatened system within weeks. But it wasn't just the technology that impressed her. It was the cooperation. Krek's artificial intelligence systems worked seamlessly with human tactical doctrine and Vakari industrial capabilities. What had once been the galaxy's greatest enemies were now its most effective protectors. "Admiral Thelqua to the bridge, please." "Admiral Thelqua to the bridge." She made her way through corridors that reflected the new galactic reality. Human, Krex, Vakari, and dozens of other species worked together without the tensions that had characterized galactic politics for centuries. The trauma counseling programs Dr. Vasquez had developed for the Krex had been expanded to address historical grievances between many species. On the bridge, she found Fleet Commander Harrison, now bearing the rank of Alliance Supreme Commander, studying tactical displays with Coordinator Vexkoth, who had become his primary strategic advisor. "Admiral, we have a situation developing in the Centauri sector," Harrison reported. "Nothing immediately dangerous, but it illustrates why we needed to change how the galaxy handles these things." The situation was familiar. A species called the Zarkoni had achieved spaceflight and made first contact with galactic civilization. Based on their initial communications, they were aggressive, militaristic, and potentially hostile to other forms of life. 5 years ago, Vexkoth observed, protocol would have been to either avoid them entirely or prepare for inevitable conflict. The Krex response would have been immediate preemptive destruction. And now? Thelqua asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Now we send a first contact team trained in de-escalation and cultural integration," Harrison replied. "Captain Chen is leading the mission personally." The approach epitomized what had become known as the human doctrine: assume the best while preparing for the worst, and always offer cooperation before considering conflict. It had worked with species after species over the past 5 years. "Commander, what makes you confident this approach will work with the Zarkoni? From the initial reports, they seem genuinely aggressive." "Because we've learned something important about species that appear aggressive during first contact," Dr. Vasquez interjected as she joined them on the bridge. "Aggression is usually a fear response. Species that have evolved under constant threat tend to assume all contact is potentially hostile." She pulled up a holographic display showing psychological profiles of dozens of species that had joined the Alliance after initially appearing hostile. "The pattern is consistent. Species that develop spaceflight while under severe environmental pressure, or in conflict with other intelligent species on their homeworld, tend to be defensive and aggressive. But once they understand they're not actually under threat, they usually become some of our most cooperative members." The insight was typically human. Look for the underlying cause of behavior, rather than just responding to the behavior itself. It was an approach that had revolutionized galactic diplomacy. "Admiral," the communications officer announced, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Captain Chen's first contact team." Chen's image appeared on the main screen, and her expression was one of satisfaction mixed with concern. "Command, first contact with the Zarkoni is proceeding as expected. They're aggressive because their homeworld is under constant bombardment from asteroid impacts. They developed spaceflight as an escape mechanism, not for exploration or conquest. We're offering assistance with planetary defense systems." "Any complications, Captain?" Harrison asked. "Just one. They've been detecting our monitoring stations for months and assumed we were planning an invasion. They've been preparing for war against the entire Alliance." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The galaxy's defensive preparations, designed to protect peaceful civilizations, had been interpreted as offensive preparations by a species conditioned to expect attacks. "Recommendations, Captain? Give me 2 weeks to demonstrate our intentions. I want to bring in Krex asteroid deflection technology and Vakari construction teams. Show them what cooperation looks like in practice." It was a perfect example of how the Alliance had learned to turn potential conflicts into partnership opportunities. Instead of seeing the Zarkoni's military preparations as a threat, they saw them as evidence of a species that understood the value of preparedness. "Approved, Captain. Keep us informed of developments." As the transmission ended, Thelqua reflected on how much had changed since that desperate day when she had broadcast her plea for aid. The galaxy had gained not just protectors, but teachers who had shown them how to break cycles of conflict that had persisted for millennia. "Admiral," Vexkoth said quietly, "there is something I must tell you. Our deep space monitors have detected signs of the original threat that destroyed our civilization. The Great Devourers are returning." The statement sent a chill through everyone on the bridge. The approaching extragalactic threat Dr. Vasquez had mentioned was apparently connected to the catastrophe that had traumatized the Krex 2,000 years earlier. "How long do we have?" Harrison asked, already shifting into strategic planning mode. Based on their approach vector and speed, approximately 18 months until they reach the outer edge of galactic space. 18 months to prepare for a threat that had casually destroyed an entire civilization. But Thelqua found herself feeling confident rather than terrified. The galaxy that would face the Great Devourers was not the same galaxy that had cowered before the Kreks. "Commander Harrison," she said firmly, "what do we need to do?" Harrison's smile was grim but determined. "What humans do best, Admiral. We prepare for the worst possible scenario and make sure everyone survives it, all of us this time." Through the observation windows, construction continued on humanity's latest defensive innovation. But now it wasn't just human technology. It was the combined knowledge and capabilities of 200 civilizations, unified by a species that had turned their greatest enemies into their most trusted allies. The Great Devourers would find a galaxy that had learned to fight as one. And they would discover what the Kreks had learned 5 years earlier. Humans didn't just respond to threats, they ended them. As alarms began sounding throughout the station, calling all personnel to emergency planning stations, Admiral Thelqua realized she was witnessing the beginning of the galaxy's greatest test. But for the first time in galactic history, she was confident they would pass it, because they had something the galaxy had never possessed before. Humans who refused to accept that anyone should face extinction alone. The age of human influence had begun. And the universe was about to learn what that meant for anyone foolish enough to threaten the civilizations they had chosen to protect.